Hello students, welcome to the series on marketing and retail business. Today we will cover unit 4. In this we will study franchising. Now the basic aim of this lecture will be to study the concept and definition of franchising, and then we will cover the issues and the challenges and the basic impact of franchisee on business. Now let us study first the concept and definition of franchising. The concept and meaning of franchising. Franchising is a systematic way of doing business by sharing the brand values and format of business between the franchisor and franchisee. The franchisor can expand his brand and business by getting the initial capital and royalty fees. The franchisee gets the shortcut path to do business on successful formats and credibility of business brands. Now, when we talk about franchising, this is a kind of a relationship between two investors. One is a successful person who is already in business for many years and his brand is working in market. He has got the success formula, the ethics, the management, the skills, the abilities. The franchisee is a person who is not known in the business, so he can connect with this known brand on a payment basis of royalty and investment. So, both the parties have the advantage. One gets the investment and expansion of business and the royalty fees, and the other gets the shortcut path and the formulas to do business. Now, let us study the types of franchising. One is the product distribution franchisee, that is Coca-Cola. Examples are Nike. Then we have the business format franchisee. Example is McDonald's, Subway, Dunkin' Donuts, etc. Then you have the management franchisee. Example Marriott and Sheraton. Now, when we talk about the types and the categories of the franchisee, there are many formats of franchising existing in the market. One is the product distribution, that is you are only distributing the channels, that is the shopkeepers do not have the ownership concept, but they are taking the product and the brands to the market or the customers. So, these relationships exist. You have examples like Coca-Cola, because the markets are diverse and this is a mass product. So, everywhere Coca-Cola cannot have their own investment. So, they contact the retailers and try to get into the connection with the customers to this impact. Then we have the business format franchisee like McDonald's, where you have the ownership with the retailer, but here the investment and the royalty is given to the bigger brand, and here the kind of the concept and the standardization of business is kept same. The training is given, the product is standardized, and the kind of the relations with the customers is standardized through the advertising. So, we have common advertising, common skills and common formats of products to be given to the customers. Then we have management franchisee, that is the hotels are taking this use of management franchisee. If you have a very big building, like you have forts and palaces which are already there, huge properties of big investors or big kings and queens, they can contact these big chains and they can bring their skills and abilities in terms to manage the buildings, because the infrastructure availability itself can not generate profits. The management is to connect with the tour operators, to connect with the airlines and get the tourists to the destination. So, we have examples of Marriott and Sheraton who are taking the businesses to the new formats and to the new heights. Now, let us study the advantages to the franchisor and franchisee. First is the franchisor. He gets the advantage of expansion and he has the legal consideration, that is he is safe. Then he has the operational consideration in terms of maintaining efficiency, and he has to face competition also. Franchisee basically has the advantage of expansion, quick start, reduced risk, access to training and ready product acceptance. So, both the parties, like who is a franchisor is obviously a bigger person, he is more successful and he has got huge investment. So, he is a person who generally gets a protection in form that he has investment taken to huge heights, and by opening chains of businesses he can reach to the larger public. So, obviously the profits will increase, he will be protected and he will get the legal advice, and the operational efficiency will increase if many partners, if many people connect to him. What are the advantages to the franchisee? He gets the ready product and the ready acceptance of brands in the market, because it takes years and it takes decades to make product accepted in the markets. The products are branded, the products have standardized formats, and the success formulas to reach to the customers through common advertising is a kind of advantage added to the franchisee. Now, let us study the disadvantages. The franchisor basically has the disadvantage of his management concepts being shared. It is sharing of secrets of business. Franchisees, that the price and the control is with the franchisor, and there is always a kind of a conflict existing between both the parties. Though the formula of franchisor and franchisor seem to be lurkative, but there are inner conflicts and inner disadvantages. The basic disadvantage for the franchisor is that his management formula of success is shared with people, and that becomes open. So, you generally cannot have secrets in your business, they are shared with the public. And when we talk about the franchisee, obviously this is a kind of a party which is having a lower edge. So, obviously a kind of a control and a kind of a conflict will always exist in the relationships, because you are earning and then sharing your profits with the franchisor. Now, let us study the relationship of franchisor and franchisee. Here we have a kind of a management contract where we have to pay royalty fee, initial capital. Then you have the territory and area of operation, and you have the duration of license and termination. The relationship basically obviously is a legal relationship. Legal relationship has to be converted into a relationship of mutual trust and benefit. Here we have the relationship in terms where we have to initially pay the royalty fees and a capital amount to sign the contract. After this, we have to specify the area which has to be covered, because the area specified will generate profits if it is in a monopolistic condition. That is, if there is only one investor and if the brand is popular, obviously the customers will come to you and the total market will be captured. And the duration is obviously for how many years the relationship will exist and when the termination will come. This is also a kind of a legal consideration which the management contract has to be signed between both the parties. What is the importance of franchisee? First, it helps in developing business from initial stage for new entrants. It helps in site selection and development. It helps in design and construction of business formats. It is advice for financial management, that is, it creates sources of finances and helps in managing the working capital by reducing risk. Now, when we study the concept of franchisee, first is when we are a new entrant in the business, a successful and a leader in the market will always help you to build a brand, because he has already got a market, he has got the clients and the connections. So, it becomes easy for him to select the site and get into the operational efficiencies of designing business. When we talk about the finances, obviously the sources, the collaboration with the banking and the financial institutions is already with the investor. So, how do we go about the funding formalities is also a known fact. The paperwork becomes easy, and then obviously the working capital management is easy, because we know what are the areas which require money and what are the kind of the wastage areas which could need control, and they could be eliminated, and there the streamlining of the funds could be done in an easy way. Now, training and development is the most important aspect of franchising. Here supervision and control is there, and it builds talent by developing training programs. See, when we come into the relationship of franchising, here the franchisor offers a kind of a course or a training to the investor. He has to have a kind of a knowledge of the product, the market, the clients. So, these now very big companies have their formats in terms of development of softwares which give you the aid, the advice, the consultancy and a kind of a program designed to have connections with the customers. So, the training formats and formulas are already with the investors. They come to the entrance, they can be learned and they could be floated for the customers. Now, let us see what is the result of franchisors and franchisee agreement. The franchisor's brand and business plus the franchisee's capital and facilities gives you successful business expansion. So, here two parties with their own skills, with their own operational efficiencies and with their own money come into a relationship, and this obviously builds the market credibility because the customers have a kind of a impact of successful brands and they are standardized. They move from the countries, enter into the global markets, cross the barriers and come into the local destinations and the local brands. So, the globalization, that is the global markets are also localized in terms where the customers in the remote areas can also have access to international brands and facilities through franchising. Now, let us see this diagram where we have shown you the kind of the impact, how do we develop the business of franchisee. Developing a franchising plan is a kind of a consultancy to be offered. We have to create a IPR audit, that is the intellectual property right audit. Then you have to prepare the documents for creating business. You have to have a developing of a team and designing the right strategy and then develop business and infrastructure of franchisee. Now, when we talk about the franchising, obviously it is a kind of a consultancy. The rights and terms, when we share the formulas or we are generally designing products which have a kind of a special niche in the market. So, these basically require that the property, intellectual property rights are protected of the investors' ideas and then the things can be shared on the basis of the payment of money. We do prepare documents and get the legal contracts done and then the training is given to float the products in the market. The first formal legal definition under the Financial Services Act of franchisee is as follows. Franchise is an agreement under which a person earns profit or income by exploiting a right conferred by the arrangement to use a trade name or design or other intellectual property or the goodwill attached to it. So, this is the formal definition of franchisee, where a kind of a relationship is between two parties to use the brand name or the intellectual property right of another person. India is not having specific rights to govern the franchising laws. So, it is broadly governed by the laws of business practices prevalent here. That is, the Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999 governs the foreign investments in India and the Contract Act of 1972. Now, let us study the intellectual property laws. First is the Copyright Act of 1972, the Trademark Act of 1999, the Patent Act of 1970, the Design Act of 2000, the Semiconductor Act Circuits Layout Act of 2000. So, these are the few laws which are operating in the market and governing the franchisee business depending on the area of selection of the products and services given to the customers. Now, let us study the legal considerations for franchising. First is the Consumer Protection Act 1986, the Sale of Goods Act 1930, Direct and Indirect Taxation Laws in cess the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act 1954, the Drug and Cosmetic Act of 1940 and the Pharmacy Act of 1948. So, these are the legal considerations which need to be consulted through the lawyers to act according the ordinance and the sections of the legal purview to design successful formulas within each industry category. The legal formulas are complicated and people need to consult lawyers before coming into the contracts. Now, let us study the real estate laws, that is the property rights which govern the franchisee business. The Transfer of Property Act 1882, the Indian Easement Act 1882, the Registration Act 1908, the Indian Stamp Act 1899 and state legislation, and it is the rent control legislations. So, because here we are sharing the property also, so the real estate laws will also govern the issues for sharing the properties, because we come in contract for at least 5 years or 10 years. It is not that after 1 year that we will terminate the relationship. So, when we are sharing property, these legal purviews have to be taken into consideration. We have the Employment and Welfare Legislation Act. Let us study the Apprentices Act of 1961, the Child Labour Act 1986, the Contract Labour Act 1970, the Employers Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provision Act 1952, the Employee State Insurance Act 1948, the Employers Liability Act 1938, the Minimum Wages Act 1948, the Payment of Bonus Act 1965. So, when we are studying franchisee, we have to obviously take into the consideration of the employee's right, because we are using the labor of the country, and here all the laws which govern the governmental organization and the private and non-governmental organization will also govern the Franchisee Act, because here we are generally concerned with the society. So, labor's provident fund and taking care for the employees' provident and other facility is the duty of the investor. We do have to get into working according to the Child Labour Act, where we have to look into that what is the age of the labor, the women empowerment issues, and we have to stop harassment for people. So, these all laws govern the franchisee business. Let us study the employment acts. This is the Maternity Benefit Act of 1961, the Payment of Gratuity Act of 1972, the Sales Promotion Employee Act of 1976, the Trade Union Act of 1926, the Workmen's Compensation Act 1923, the Payment of Wages Act 1948 and the Shops and Establishment Act also. So, all the employment facilities which are given by the Government of India and by the private organization are incurred as such on the Franchisee Act also. So, it is a kind of a very complicated procedure, because even if a MNC from a foreign country is entering the domestic market, they have to conform to the laws of the domestic area, though the companies are international, but they have to follow the laws which are prevalent in those destinations. Now, let us study the options of franchise availability. We have the fruit adulteration industry, the milk and dairy products, cooking oils and packaging. We have storing and expiry dates, the quality and the freshness. Now, when we talk about the options, the issues and the challenges, obviously we have to look into the system where we enter into the franchisee business. We are not getting into that the food is adulterated or it is stored for a longer time. What is the expiry date? How it is important to maintain quality and get the products to the market in a fresh and a sustainable way. We need to look into the aspects where the delivery schedules are met. So, if you are an investor, it is not only to enter into the contract and take the brand, but you have to work on the operational aspects of looking into how the brands do have to maintain their value for the long term. The issues impacting successful franchising is basically by effective branding, it is by audits and the customer feedback, the quality checks and the staff training. Obviously, the branding is a kind of a continuous process. We have to maintain quality and we have to reach the customers through effective advertising. We have to have a quality control in terms to check the operational errors and the kind of the grievances of the customers. The brands can only maintain their values if the customer feedback is positive. So, it is a kind of a continuous relationship between both the parties to work on all aspects. It is not that one time you have signed a contract and the relationship finished. The management has to look into the details of everyday business to maintain the quality of the products and to manage the kind of the brand value of the investors. Now, let us study the global trends impacting franchising. Large segment of Indian young population is growing as entrepreneurs. The purchasing power of Indian population is increasing. There is large growth option in reality, food, beverages, hospitality, fitness, tourism and education segments. Now, when we talk about the global trends, the Indian markets are also growing. The young entrepreneurs and the young population is generating a lot of pulse and impact in the market. These people are educated and they have an increased purchasing power. The international brands are also being copied in the local markets. The customers are becoming aware and are demanding standardized and successful products. The franchisee business is rolling on and the revolution is impacting the domestic economies. The collaborations, the connection, the ventures are happening everywhere in the industry. All the industries in terms of education, fitness, tourism, travel, food and clothing. Every brand is having a format which is successful in some other market to enter other markets. The destinations are converging and people are using successful products available everywhere. The business is changing, markets are converging and sharing of excellence in terms of management training and profits is being done everywhere in the world. Now, let us study the summary of this lecture. In this lecture, we have talked about franchising. It is a relationship between two investors. One is franchisor who is successful in the market and one is franchisee who is a new entrant. Both enter into a legal relationship which is governed by the legal system of the domestic market. The relationship of exchange is on the basis that the management, skills, talent and the investors guidance is available to the franchisee who basically gets the kind of business or the ready market available. He pays royalty and money to the franchisor and they enter into a relationship of enhancing their business. Franchising is governing all the international markets. The Indian brands are also being successful in the foreign markets and the foreign market brands are also being successful in the local markets of India. The market is huge and the industry is large. I hope the students must have understood the impact of franchising on the markets and the advantages and the potential of this industry. Thank you, students.